26.
Hi, my name is Robin, and I'm an alcoholic. It's really nice to be here today. And Jay, thank you so much for asking me to speak. I got sober. My sobriety date is March 12th, 2000. I went to my first meeting 8 days later. I went to the log cabin in West Hollywood, California, and Jay was there. And Jay, I think, was there every day that I went to the log cabin after that. And I went there, I think, every single morning for at least the first 3 years of my sobriety. But we recently reconnected on a Zoom meeting, and it was just so great to see him. So I come, I've earned this seat honestly. I come from generations of alcoholics and gamblers and addicts, and my mom was from Germany. She was an alcoholic. Her father was an alcoholic. My mother suffered a lot of abuse on many levels. Came to America in 1966, not knowing a word of English, and she met my father, who came from a long line of alcoholics and gamblers in the laundry room in their apartment building in Detroit, Michigan. And they got married a few years later. He was Jewish, she was not. It wasn't that long after World War II. It was not a marriage that was celebrated by many people. My mother suffered from horrible, horrible depression. And in 1975, she started a series of suicide attempts and hospitalizations. We were living in New Jersey. And interestingly, I got hold of her psychiatric records when I was in my 20s. And in it, she talks about the neighbors doing an intervention on her. And um and my mom, when I think about my mom, I remember the first time I ever smelled gin, I was like, "Oh my God, it's mom." Like that was what my mother smelled like. And in February of 1975, so anyway, they did an intervention, and she talked about how soon after that she found religion. She became a born again Christian, and she stopped drinking because of that. And so it was interesting because she had a spiritual experience that made her stop drinking. But, you know, he really did not want to stay on this earth. And in February of 1975, she got her wish and she died by suicide. And, you know, in the 12 and 12, it talks about step two, about those of us who believed in God and then we stopped, and my feeling was, if there was God, how would that God have taken my mother away from me like that? So I believed in God, but I did not believe in God for me. Um, I always say that, you can't make this stuff up. My father, 3 years later, married a woman, also an alcoholic, also a depressive, and it turned out had been in the psych ward the same time as my mother. My father did not know that, but he married this woman. Um, she had two daughters. They then went on to have a son. So I became the oldest of four children, and my stepmother had lots of breakdowns, lots of attempts, lots of hospitalizations. And, but the whole thing was, and my dad was doing a lot of cocaine and he was gambling and winning a lot of money. And but everything looked good on the outside. Like there was a huge elephant in the room, but if it was well dressed, it got to stay, and it was well dressed. So, it was kind of chaos inside, but no one really knew that. And, my alcoholism, um, I think it was always there because it was always about, when I get there, then I'll be happy, then I can relax, then I'll be safe. So for a long time, it was, when I get to college and get away from these crazy people, then it's all going to be okay. And when I was 15 years old, before I went to college, I was at a party at my friend Kelly's house, and someone gave me a rum and coke, and I drank it, and I got the, and suddenly that pane of glass that was between me and the world was gone. And I could connect. And suddenly I was smart enough, I was pretty enough, I was funny enough, I could talk to boys. Like I could be amongst you and not feel like you were up here and I was down there. Like the drinking gave me like a level playing field. I followed that rum and coke with a few more, and that night I threw up. And, after that, every time I drank, I threw up because I thought that meant you were doing it right. And, for good or for bad, my drinking never got me in trouble. I was still home by curfew. I was still getting straight A's. I still got into an amazing college. Like my life continued to work. And really, I was a happier person because I got to self-soothe with alcohol. So I went to college. I was thrilled to be away from this crazy family. And, I say it was like I was Sylvia Plath by day, like walking around like depressed and writing in my journal and all of that. And then I would drink at night and I was Holly Golightly and I was the life of the party and I was happy. But it was that Jekyll and Hyde existence, right? It was that duality. And um, you know, you do, in a way, it was a geographic, and after a while, it stopped working, and suddenly it became, well, when I get out of college and I move to LA, then it's all going to be okay. Then I'm going to be happy. And I did, and I graduated, and I moved out to LA, and I started working in Hollywood, and I became successful very, very quickly. And I started amassing the trappings of what looked like an incredibly successful life. And people would look at me and they'd say, "Oh my God, you're so young and look at what you've achieved." And gosh, like what you have it all. And, inside, I thought I was a fraud. I thought I was going to be found out any minute. I thought they were going to take it all away from me. And you know, it used to be that I would drink when I got to the party, and then it was I would drink as I was getting ready for the party. And by the end, it was like, why go to the party? Like, why not just sit on my couch and look up at the Hollywood Hills and drink, And that's what it became. But before it became that, I met a guy who was an alcoholic and he drank more than me. So he was the one with the problem. But and we started drinking at home because we'd have these dinner parties and all of that. But after we broke up and I was brokenhearted, I kept drinking alone. And I thought I'll stop when I feel better. Everything was like when. And I didn't stop, and I would kept drinking at home, and it's a progressive disease. And it was like, I'm never going to drink and drive. And then cut to like me on the 10 freeway with one hand over my eyes so I could focus, and getting home and waking up the next morning and holding my breath as I looked at my car to make sure like there aren't any dents or scratches or whatever. And throwing away the wine bottles and trying not to hear the clinking because there were so many of them, as I put them in the dumpster. Um, and I had a very social career, and so a lot of my career was going out after work for work drinks. And so, I got to do it. And interestingly, when I got sober, and I did the 20 questions, and it says like, did your drinking ever get in the way of your job? And I was like, absolutely not. And a large part of my job was reading scripts. And I used to say that I love to get up early in the morning and work. And so I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and read the scripts that I needed to read. And the truth was, I couldn't read them at night because I was so drunk and I passed out. So it was like that way that we rationalize, this behavior. So, anyways, I met a woman through work and we became really good friends. And she was amazing. She was funny, this dark sense of humor. Um, we had like the same kind of crazy, and we started hanging out on weekends. And one night we were at a party and I was very drunk. And in front of a room full of people, I said, "You don't drink, do you?" And she said, No, I don't drink anymore. And I said, "Are you an alcoholic?" And she said, Yeah, an alcoholic in recovery. And I said, "Oh my God, you have to go to those meetings?" And she said, "Well, I choose to go to those meetings." And I said, "I am so sorry." And she said, "Thanks, but I'm not. Thank you, though." And I said, "I will be right back." And I went to get another drink, and there was a big sliding glass door, and I didn't realize it was closed, and I smacked into it, and I had this huge bruise on my head. But I felt really sorry for her because she was an alcoholic who couldn't drink anymore. So bless her heart, she remained my friend, even though, I drank and drank and drank and drank. And, you know, I would call her up and I would tell her all my drama. And, essentially what happened was she became, I hadn't stopped drinking, but she was sponsoring me. She was sharing experience, strength, and hope about how to get through life. And she never told me to stop drinking, but she did suggest that I go to Al Anon, which I did. And I went to Al Anon, and about 6 weeks later, I was like, who am I kidding? And because I remember I went away on vacation to Martha's Vineyard by myself, and I said, you know what? I'm not going to drink. And every night I would sit in my Airbnb and I wouldn't drink and I would watch movies and I would think, see, I'm not drinking. I don't have a problem because if I had a problem, I'd be drinking. And I was obsessed about it. And I'd get up in the morning and I was like, I didn't drink. See, I really didn't have a problem. And I got home from a week of not drinking. And the first thing I did was pour myself a drink because I didn't have a problem. And I had showed myself that. And so it was like, the obsession. And so, anyways, the end of my drinking, I met a guy and I was going to cook him dinner and he was going to come over for dinner and I wasn't going to drink. And because, I didn't have a problem. But, made a nice dinner. So, why should I him from having a glass of wine? So I got a bottle of wine, not for me, for him. And he came to dinner and I poured him a glass of wine and I thought, you know, I don't mind drinking alone, but some people they don't like that. So I'm just gonna pour myself some wine, but I'm not gonna drink it. I'm just gonna keep it in the glass. And so I poured the drink and we had the dinner and then, I was like, maybe he's wasn't drinking. He really didn't drink. And I was like, well, I'll just have a sip. So he sees that, it's okay to drink. And so cut to it's the end of the night and he's gone. And I have gone through my glass, his glass, and the rest of the bottle. And on a night that yet again I said I wasn't going to drink. And I was walking back to my kitchen with the empty glass, with the lipstick stains on the wine glass. I'll never forget that. And I looked in the mirror and I was like, my name is Robin and I'm an alcoholic. And I like waited to be struck by lightning. I waited for like the people from AA to come, through the door, and nothing happened other than I had said my truth. And so a week later, I went to my friend who didn't drink, and it was a Sunday morning. She was having a birthday party, a birthday brunch. And I show up. No, no, no. It was the day after. That's what it was the day after that. And I was hungover, but it was her birthday brunch. And there were all these people there, and they were happy and bright-eyed, and it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and no one was hungover. And it turned out, not only was that my first day sober, but it turned out to be the members of one of my first home groups, my Sunday morning home group. And I didn't know that. But what I did know was I didn't have a drink for a week. And a week later, I went to her apartment and I sat there and I said, I haven't had a drink for a week. And she said, that's great. And I said, do you think I'm an alcoholic? And she said, well, it's a self-diagnosed disease. What do you think? And I thought, just tell me, like just because that's what I wanted. I wanted you all to tell me what to do So then I could blame you later if it didn't work out, or I didn't have to take risks. I didn't have to go to God for help. Like I just made everyone my higher power. It's like, are you my higher power? Are you my higher power? I remember someone called me up once and they said, "Oh, I saw this dress. It was so you." And I said, "What did it look like?" Because I didn't know who I was and I needed you to tell me who I was. And once you told me who I was, I could do that. I was a chameleon. Like I knew who you needed to be, and I was great at that. And it was exhausting. And that was part of why I drank. So anyway, she said, I said, "I know I'm an alcoholic." And she said, "Would you like to go to a meeting?" And I said, "Yes." And the next morning I went to the log cabin and I walked in there and I was dressed up in my, fancy suit and my expensive shoes. And the speaker was talking about having lost everything and like living in a box. And I was like, okay, this is not me. This is not my story. But people said, listen to the feelings, don't listen to the facts, and see if and I did. And I really related to the feelings. And later that day I went to work and I prayed and I hadn't prayed in a really, really in decades. And I said, okay, God, if you're really there, I need a sign that I should go to another meeting because I'm still, I don't know. I don't know if I should do this. I don't know. This person was a lot worse off than me. And then I was like, there were people in the meeting who didn't have teeth, like that's where I was at that point in my sobriety. It was all about the outsides. And I was walking to the ladies' room and I heard this voice that said, it's a disease and you didn't cause it and you can't cure it, but AA can help you arrest it. And I was like, who said that? And and I went to a meeting that night. And I went to a meeting the next night. And I went to a meeting the next night. And when I saw the steps, like some people say I saw the steps and I saw the God word and I got freaked out. Like I got freaked out by the we word. I was not a we person. I was an I person. I was a person who sat on the end. I was a person who like was not a joiner. And I thought, I'm going to come in and I'm going to work the steps much faster than any of you have ever worked them. I'm going to do them much better than you've ever done them. And I'm going to leave. And that's cool. And you know, that's not what happened. What happened was the longer I was sober and the more my feelings that, uncorked the jug and the feelings started coming out, like I needed help. And I remember I got a sponsor and she said, call me every day. And I would wait until I was in a really good place and I'd call her. And then one day I called her and she said, how are you? I said, I'm good. I spent 45 minutes in the fetal position, like hysterical, but I'm good now. And she was like, why don't you call me when that happens? And I was like, oh God, I didn't want anyone to see me like that. But for whatever reason, the next time that happened, I did. And I felt better. I took direction and like I got to start having a different experience. Um, and I got to see that I could open up to people and I wasn't going to be thrown out, and I wasn't going to be judged. And people were going to nod and they were going to say, I've been there. And here's what I did that got me through that. So, a few years into my sobriety, this fabulous fancy life that I had didn't feel good anymore. I didn't want it anymore. It didn't fit me anymore. And I wanted to leave. And thank God my sponsor was like, don't leave. But like God will take care of it. And God did take care of it because the fact that I didn't want to be in that job anymore was very clear to my boss who said, like, I don't think you're happy and I need someone in this job who wants this job. And so I got fired. And there was something else I wanted to do. And I thought, because I think by that time I had been sober like 3 years, I thought because I was sober and because God loved me and because I went to AA, everything was going to come together in about 3 months. Like I wasn't going to have to stress. I wasn't going to have to be uncomfortable. Like I was taken care of. Like I had my AA card that said like you are immune from the slings and arrow of fate. Like that's what I heard when I first heard the promises. What I heard was You're going to have $1 million. No one's ever going to break your heart and no one's going to die. Like that's what I heard, And now what I know to be true is, you're going to go through life and you're going to go through it sober, you know, and you're not immune to the slings and arrows of fate. Um, so anyways, um, my life did not come together after I left this job. And I was someone, that armor of like you know, property and prestige was really big. And that was how I still held myself at arm's length from people. And that all went away. And I remember being really, really, really mad at AA because I would listen to all of you and I would hear how great your life was, and my life was imploding. And really, what was happening was like all of the ways that, all of the money went away, all of my ability to people please and help you by giving you a job or whatever went away. Um, and I had to be vulnerable, and I hated that. And I was so mad at God, and I stopped sharing at meetings. I was still going to meetings, but I was like, I'm not, this isn't working. This isn't working. I'm not getting what I want. And really, like, I was still sober, but I wasn't getting what I wanted. So I went to a meeting on a Wednesday night in Hollywood, and the speaker, um, was speaking and I really related, and I went up to her after and I said, here's what's going on with me. I hate AA and I'm not sharing and I don't want to come here anymore and I don't want to drink, but I think I'm going to stop coming to AA. And she said, "So you said you'd not be sharing." She said, are you looking for suggestions? Are you looking for feedback?" And I was like, "Okay, fine." And she said, "I think you should go to a meeting and raise your hand at every meeting, for the next week and share." And I was like, "Yeah, I don't think so, but thanks." And then I had a moment and I thought we stood at the turning point, and I thought about it and I thought I could keep doing what I'm doing and keep getting what I'm getting, or I could do it differently. And so the next meeting I went to, my hand went up and I shared and I cried, I ugly cried, and people just nodded. And people came up to me and they said, "I've been there. And here's what I did. And here's my number." And all of a sudden, I was back in AA again. All of a sudden, like I was in there instead of on the fringes. And I got to see that my worth did not come from how much money I made or how successful I was. My worth came from being able to give you a ride to a meeting or being able to sit with you after a meeting at coffee and listen to you, or being able to take a commitment, or, whatever it was. And I just didn't, I was waiting for me to tell the truth and to have people say, "Oh my God, you're doing this wrong. You're such a loser. There's no hope for you." And that wasn't like what it gave me, that paradox, because for me, AA and spirituality, it's all about the paradox, right? So like the more open I was, the messier I was, the more I connected. And I remember people started asking me to speak at meetings. And one guy asked me, and I said, "I don't know if you heard me, but like, I am not a vision for you. I am a hot mess." And he said, "And you're sober. You're staying sober through this." And I was like, "Oh, right. That's what it's about." So, um, about 7 years into my sobriety, I moved from LA to New York. And I was so glad that New York, that there's AA no matter where you went. And I went to New York and things started coming back together for me professionally. And what was really amazing was it was great that it came back, but really what was amazing to me was that one day at a time I had stayed sober and I had kept showing up and I kept going through that really, really, really long hallway that felt like the Sahara Desert. And because people said, "Just keep coming back." And I did, and things changed, and I didn't know when it was going to change, but it did. So I lived in the city for a few years and then I moved up to the Hudson Valley and I was 44 years old. I was not married. Um, I did not want children. Um, I thought it was just because I didn't like kids, and really what it was after doing many, many inventories and stuff, um, I just felt I was way too broken to have a family, and I was really afraid of what would happen if I became a mother. I was really afraid I'd have the same fate as my mother. I made, I remember doing an inventory when I was 10 years sober, about relationships that was really, really eye-opening. And, you see it when you can see it. And I saw like the common denominator was me, and it shifted things. And my broken picker got fixed. And when I was 44, I went to New Orleans for work. And everyone involved in this project I was working on was like a raging alcoholic and addict. And my sponsor said, "You better go to a meeting." And I was like, "I don't have time to go to a meeting." And she said, "You better go to a meeting." And so I found a meeting at 7:15 a.m. in New Orleans. And I walk into this meeting, and this cute guy introduces himself to me, and I ended up marrying him. I ended up marrying him a few years later. I ended up moving to Louisiana, to Baton Rouge, and I always say it was the best dollar I ever put in the basket. And he really wanted kids. And I realized then that really I just hadn't found the person I wanted to have kids with yet. And when I was 46, and then when I was 47, I gave birth to a beautiful little girl and a beautiful little boy who are now 10 and 9. And being a mother has been the most healing thing in my life. I get the chills. My kids are growing up in a sober home. They have parents who are present. They feel so safe in the world. Like I look at the confidence my children have, and I marvel at it, and I didn't have any of that. And I heal so much by being their mom. And it really has been, but it's also the bigger your life gets, the bigger your God has to get, right? And so, like, suddenly it was fine when it was just me, and now you bring all these other beings into the picture, and I want to control it. And what if they don't have their own higher power? Like, maybe I still think I am their higher power. I don't want to trust that I'm not, but they do have their higher power, own higher power. So I moved, like I said, I moved to Baton Rouge 13 years ago. And, I started teaching at a university. I did that for like 5 years. I became an end of life doula. I'm going back in the fall and getting my MSW. I like my life is, and it's interesting because I'm doing the steps again. Um, and really what I'm really working on now, because 25 years into this, what I have not yet given up is this propulsion to constantly be doing and achieving and producing. And I am so afraid to stop moving, right? And in doing the step work, what is being revealed to me is that my relationship with a higher power is, as long as I'm being a good girl, I won't get in trouble, right? As long as I keep my head down and keep doing my work, like I won't be thrown out. And I'm exhausted, and it's not how I want to live the next 25 years of my sobriety. So, what I have really come to terms with, what I always talk about is, for me, when I get out of the moment, I get into fear, right? So the only place I can access my higher power is right here, right now. When I think about 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now, 3 years from now, it's never good. It's always worst case scenario. That is how I am wired. And the brain that is trying to figure that out and scheme and, okay, if I do this, I'll get this and this. That's a 6-year-old who just lost her mother to suicide. That who is trying to figure that out. That is not the 56-year-old woman with 25 years of sobriety, right? The 56-year-old woman with 25 years in sobriety is here and has a higher power and has all of you in AA and has a sponsor, right? That I can do. I can do today. I can't do tomorrow. I can't do 3 weeks from now. Um, so, my recovery has not been linear and it has not been logical. I have one of those lives. I have a friend in New York named Karen, and she always says, polish over here, shine over here. Like the work that I'm doing, I don't know how it's going to pay off. Like, I want A plus B to give me C. And like, because it makes sense. And that's not how it works, right? I can do A and I can do B, and then I can get Z that's given me from out of left field at the 11th hour. And that's really like, that is the kind of life I've always had. Like, I do the footwork, but the thing that's come in always comes in at the last minute for me. And I am always graced with it. That's just how my life has worked. And I still don't trust it, right? I still think I've used up all my chips. I still think like, yeah, God came through me that time, but I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen again. Um, but luckily, like I've learned like just not to listen to myself. And I love that we're not all sick on the same day, right? And I can call someone else up and they can like hear me and they can say, okay, you're because I have a disease of perception. And they're like, I hear what you're saying, but this is really what I'm seeing. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think of it that way. Or, okay, I'll trust you just for today. So um it's been, my life has been one of depth and breadth versus this upward trajectory, right? And so it's like, and I see a lot of the people I get sober with in LA, and they've stayed in LA and they have not changed careers, and they have these jobs where they're making millions of dollars. And my brain wants to say, see, they're doing it right and you're not. Like you made really bad choices and this is where you are. And which is just it's not true, because the truth is like I I moved from LA to Manhattan to the Hudson Valley to Baton Rouge. Like I've made 4 moves in sobriety. All of them, none of them were geographics. All of them were run by sponsors. All of them, worked out just great. And I have this depth and I have this wealth of experience to share with people that is amazing. And, you know, I think about I think about the log cabin and I think about where I got sober. And I remember after I celebrated a year, I shared my story for the first time. And I talked about my mother's death. And when I was growing up, I never talked about my mother's suicide. I kept it a secret until I was in my 20s. And no one knew. None of my friends knew. And, you know, it's a really big part of my story and I share it. And a year later or so, I'm walking in LA and no one, right? That's the joke. No one walks in LA. So the fact that I was even like walking down the street and this woman stopped me and she said, you don't know me, but I was at the log cabin the first time you shared your story. And I said, oh. And she said, and I have 2 small children, and I was actively planning my death. And I heard you, and I heard the effects that your mother's suicide had. And I went over to Cedar Sinai and I checked myself into the hospital. And I was like, oh my God. And I think about how we never know what we share with another person, how and when that's going to resonate with them, you know, and that phrase, like, you might be the only big, you know, you're the walking book, big book, the only big book that someone might see. Like, I think about that. Like, I remember I used to go to a women's meeting in LA, and I was going through a really, really bad depression, and I was really ashamed by it. But this was a safe space for me, and I started sharing about it. And because I had to, it was like, you know, you can save your ass or save your face. And I was saving my ass. And one of the women who went to that meeting, um, she called me up one day, and you know, we're all children of God, but this child of God was not one of my favorite children of God. Like, she was just like not one of my favorites in the meeting. But she called me and she said, I'm calling you because I've been listening to you and I've been watching you walk through this really, really hard time. And I'm really struggling. And I feel like you would understand. And I did, you know, and we became very good friends after that. But again, it was like, you know, I was sharing something to that notion of having to look good on the outside, of having to have all the answers. I let it go, right? And I just told my truth, and I trusted that I would, in telling my truth. Like, I truly believe when we sit there in a meeting, like when I first came in, I had a lot of trouble with meditation. I couldn't sit there, I couldn't meditate. And then for a while, my meditation was like yoga, like I could do a moving meditation. But then I realized that just sitting in a meeting and being quiet and listening to someone tell their story, I would get these insights into my life and my problems, and you know, the answer would appear. And that was a form of meditation for me, you know, but I'm just so glad that, you know, when I first got sober, I saw someone take a cake and they said, I am the same person with my parents that I am with my partner, that I am at work. And I was like, how? Like, I was Sybil with like 19 personalities. Like, I couldn't be the same person because I needed you to like me. So I needed you to be who I thought you wanted to be. And now, like, all these years later, I am the same person. I'm the same person with my husband that I am in an AA meeting, that I am with people I work with. Like, it's just be, and part of it might be I'm just getting older and I'm too tired to try and be someone else, you know, but really it's because I am so much more comfortable in my skin. And there was a woman who used to go to a meeting in Hollywood that I went to, and I saw her come in and she just wasn't ready, right? And she had all these excuses why that meeting, there were people there who had such low bottoms, and she had a high bottom, and she was super successful, and she drank expensive wine. And um she stopped going to meetings and she started drinking, but she would still call me. And like my friend all those years ago, she'd call me and I'd take her call, right? And I'd listen to her. And she had a Christmas party, and I went, and there were all these people, and I was there, and I was the only one not drinking, and I had a really good time. And I went home and I went to bed, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang, and it was her. And she said, can you take me to a meeting? And she had been out for about a year and a half. And I said, sure. And we went to a meeting, and we went to lunch after. And she said, you know, I really don't remember anything about last night. I was so drunk. But I had this moment where I looked over at you, and you were so comfortable in your skin. And I could just see that you were so comfortable. And you were the only one there who wasn't drinking. And I want that. I want to feel that comfortable. And I think that has been about 18 years she's been sober since that day. You know, she went to a meeting and she never felt the need to drink again. And she got so involved in AA, and she got married and she had a child, and she's got this like incredibly beautiful life. But, you know, that notion of like, I couldn't go to parties and not drink. You know, when I first got sober, I'd go to a party And this was before cell phones. And I would just go like sit in the bathroom, or I would sneak into someone's bedroom and like use the landline to like call my sponsor, and like she'd have to talk me down. I would go to eat with people after a meeting and I'd have to like sit on my hands because it took everything in me not to like get up and bolt. Like I just didn't know how to be around you without a drink, you know? Or I didn't know how to be around you and not do work so hard to get you to like me, you know? And that is just not who I am anymore, you know? And now, you know, I've had so many sponsees over the years, and some have stayed and some have gone. And I also know that like their path is their path, and I can share my experience, strength, and hope with them. But I also know that things that I don't have experience with, I direct them somewhere else. Like in the beginning, I wanted to like, let me go read a book about this so I can share with them. I had no business doing that. Like that's not my business. That's not my experience. That's someone who wrote a book's experience, you know? So for me to say, you know what, I don't have any experience, but Jay has experience, call Jay or whatever it was, it doesn't mean I'm any less of a person, right? It just means I don't have experience with that. And, you know, I still want to get an A. Do you know what I mean? Like I still want to do it right. I'm still really afraid. And this came up when I was doing my step work the other day. So I mentioned that my mother died by suicide. The way that she did it was the carbon monoxide in the car in the garage. And what happened that night was the carbon monoxide came up through the window, and I woke up, and I woke up and I went and I woke my dad up, and then I passed out. And my dad was able to see that she wasn't in bed and go find her and call the ambulance, and then he passed out. And I woke up in the hospital the next day. And what I did not know until my 20s, my dad told me this, was when I woke up and I was 6 that morning in the hospital, I told him about the tunnel and the light, and my mom was at the end, and she kept saying, you have to go back, you have to go back. And I said, no, I want to stay with you. And she said, you can't, you have to go back. And what had happened was I had flatlined 3 times in the ambulance, and they kept bringing me back. And I didn't know that. I mean, I think I did know this on some level, but what came up in my step work is that there is this part of me that feels like I somehow self-willed my way back here. And because I self-willed my way back here, I damn well better do it right. I damn well better get an A. I really have to work hard or else I'm going to be taken out again. So that's why I keep my head down. That's why I work really hard. That's why I don't like rock the boat, because I need to be a good girl, you know? And that was really profound, you know, because that is not the kind of relationship I want with a higher power. And I, you know, I can talk a good game and I can say like, you know, I it's back, like I am back at step 2. Like I am back at really looking at what my relationship is with a higher power and what I want it to be. Like my sponsor was like, "Well, you need to write, what about that part you're supposed to write about what you want your relationship with a higher power to be?" And I was like, "Oh, right. I get to want it to look a certain way." So I'm in the process of doing that. But, you know, this is more is always revealed, right? And I look at the fact that my recovery is not linear and it is not logical, and I'm given these opportunities to keep growing, and I am given these opportunities to take risks and reinvent myself and try new things, you know, and um, you know, being married, like, oh my God, like sometimes I'm like, how do you people do this? Like, this is so hard. Like, I was so spiritual when I lived alone in my converted barn with 2 cats. Like, I was like, you know, it's really easy to be spiritual when you live alone and not have to pick up the phone and get back to someone. It's really hard to be spiritual when, you're married and you have two kids who live very active lives and you're struggling financially and your husband chews and that chewing is really loud. And I'm like, what did I do? What did I do? How did I get here? Like, that's the stuff, you know how they talk about like we drink like over the, we're great in a crisis, but like we drink over the hangnail. Like, I'm like, I can't sit through one more night of him chewing, crunching on that potato chip. Like, and thankfully I have people who I call up and they're like, yeah, I know. Just one day at a time, stay married, and I do. And I'm so glad I do. So being able to let someone truly see me at my best and at my worst has been the biggest gift, and like I said, being able to be present for these two children and give them a foundation where they feel safe and they feel seen and they feel listened to has been incredible. My kids just got back. They were at sleepaway camp for 3.5 weeks. Like, they love it. And the fact that they go away and people are like, don't you miss them so much? And I'm like, you know what? I, yes, but I'm so glad that they're in their happy place and they have so much fun. And I'm so glad they can do that, that they feel so safe in the world that they can do that. When I used to go to sleepaway camp, my stepmother would write me letters when she was drunk about how much she was struggling with my father, and didn't know if she could stay married to him. Like, those are the letters I was getting at sleepaway camp. So that doesn't have to happen now. So I'm so happy to be sober. I am a work in progress. I am a hot mess still, and I am perfectly imperfect. And I am so glad, Jay, that you asked me to speak tonight. So thank you.
Yay. Oh my God.